more impactful on my relationship with sex is my relationship with fatness and gender versus like the actual mechanics of
Yeah.
sex or dating. Cause like fat people can have sex. Like,
What? I didn't know that.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Queer Relationships, Queer Joy.
Yay! Welcome, everyone. Well, I say it often, and we are absolutely excited to have a guest today who she is coming at us from Australia, all the way from Australia.
I'm so impressed. Thank you for being here that early.
you're so welcome. Yeah, I come from the future. Everything's just as terrible as it was yesterday. Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, we were just starting before we pushed record, getting a little update on your relationship status, which I would love
Yes.
for the listeners to hear. But first, I want to
Sure.
make sure that we do, I was going to say proper introductions, but at least somewhat of introductions.
Some form of
Some
introducing
form of
ourselves to new listeners.
So, Melissa, you want to start with the introduction?
Sure.
I'll let you introduce yourself, Dani.
So I'm Melissa DeSegura. I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist and a professional counselor, and I work at Connective Therapy Collective. I'm a white person. I am able-bodied. I'm bisexual. I'm polyamorous, and I am gender fluid. I use she and they pronouns.
My name is Keely C. Helmick. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a certified sex therapist, owner of Connective Therapy Collective. I am a white, non-binary, queer person, pronouns they, them.
Well, welcome, Dani. Do you want to
Thank you.
introduce yourself
Sure.
in whatever form feels comfortable?
First of all, it's so weird because I've been like an avid listener of this pod for like 2 years. And I'm like, oh my God, they're introducing themselves. Oh my God, I'm not listening. What the heck? So hi, I'm Dani. I'm currently studying my Bachelor's of Counseling at Griffith University in Brisbane. I'm a fat activist, white person, chronic illness, PCOS, liver, maybe endo, who knows? Women's health is a joke. And I'm a cis woman. I go by pronoun she and her, and I'm queer, and I'm fat.
And you're up early this morning talking to us.
Yeah.
Quick update, because I loved your little story about your girlfriend right now. What would you like to say about your status and fill listeners?
So I were previous to this relationship, I identified as queer, but I guess before that I identified as bisexual. I think queer is a better catch-all for me. But prior to this relationship, I had dated women in the past, but I'd never been in like a formal like monogamous relationship with a woman. I'd mainly been in a monogamous relationship with men. So prior to dating her, I was like, oh, kind of re-questioning ideas around like relationships and monogamy and marriage and kind of going down that road with my therapist. And on our first date, I was like, I'm not moving in with a partner ever again. And I'm not going to get married. And then cut to 7 months later, we already live together and we will probably get married. But I think the thing that is interesting for me, which I didn't get to touch on in my introductions, but like you guys have had an episode on before, is that I also live with my best friend, who's also like my queer platonic partner. So she was kind of a really big, important part of my life that was like, I don't really know if I want to live with a partner again.
Yeah.
And I was really nervous about getting into a relationship just to see how that dynamic would go. But now they're like best friends and it's very cute and they're obsessed with each other. So it's great.
Oh
Oh my
gosh.
gosh. I am so
Yeah.
jealous. You have like the best of both worlds. I always say I want like the best friend and the partner, and like you have it all. That's so awesome. And how queer is it for you to be like, oh yeah, now we're living together after like 7
Yeah.
months.
Yeah, I know. She like my girlfriend's favorite queer joke is like the U-Haul one, which I'm also like, babe, what is this, 2004? But at the same time, I'm like, fair enough. Like that literally was me because I don't know. I'm not really a annoying person at parties now when, when people are like, when you know, you know. I used to hate those people. I was like, you don't know shit. Like nobody knows anything. And then now I'm like, oh yeah, when you know, you know.
It
I
happens.
know it's like a constant reminder. I mean, Melissa and I talked about it before, and I get that. I will forget that's a thing. And then I think that translates to things other than just romantic relationships, but that gets harped on in romantic relationships. When I'm looking at buildings, when I'm looking at houses, friends, connections of when I hiring someone, like I remember when I met Melissa, and I think I've told you this, Melissa. I never said this on air though. When Melissa and I first met, and it was during COVID on Zoom hiring, and I like it took 2 minutes, and I was like, oh yeah. I was like,
You
oh
didn't
yeah.
tell me that, but I
Yeah.
felt like it was funny too because there was another person interviewing me as well, but there was a link confusion, so it was just you and I, Keely, and like we were like hitting it off. I'm like, well, this feels great.
Oh my God, how romantic, guys. It's lovely.
Yeah, and I
When you know, you know.
when you
Yeah, when you know. But also, like, also kind of fuck those people a little bit because I feel like, like, even though I say that, like, every relationship, I feel like, regardless of whatever comes with its own set of insecurities and like trauma, and like, I've definitely had a lot of that in previous relationships. So, like, there's still also I'm like a person who like with high anxiety and depression. So like I'm like, well, nothing's ever 100%. But as far as like most like all other relationships I've had, like when I met her, it was like very different. And it kind of felt like when I met my queer platonic partner. So I was like, oh, this is like special. And it
oh,
was a blind date. Well, kind of like our uni friend set, like my uni friend is her best friend. So she set us up.
Wow.
cute. I love
Yeah.
I can still vibe with a blind date. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
just old and old school, but like I can vibe. Well, I'm thinking about the other side of it is when people have been like friends for a super long time and then start dating. And I'm of the era, I will admit it, when Harry met Sally, I did like many a
How
time.
embarrassing to admit.
But I wanna but in essence of, like, there is this piece of it, like, how they're friends for so long, that there's also this queer story of being friends for a long time and then figuring out that you want to be romantic or that you have these sexual romantic feelings towards somebody. So,
Truth.
and,
Yeah.
there's that other side of it, like, that right away, or there's this, like, tension for years and unsure and then figure it out. And you look
That's what I
back.
feel
Yeah.
like that's, like, been my experience when I came out of, like, repression is looking back at all my friendships that were like, "Oh, I had a crush on her." I didn't know. There was always that tension.
I think that's sort of common with like, like femme relationships, right? Or like at least relationships that aren't with cis men is that like I have always really been great at friendship. I've always really valued connections with other femme people or non-binary people or people that aren't cis men. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with them, but like, that's where a lot of my like friendship group and just people I connect with really at the core level exist in identity wise. And like so many of those relationships, like even when I met Julia, my partner, like it felt like she was like someone I could be best friends with. And like I think that's just so important because if you don't have a solid level of friendship, like for me at least in my identity and experience, like it's hard for me to grow those other amorous feelings above that. So that was really nice when I met her too, because I was like, oh, this is the kind of girl that I could be best friends with. And then I was like, also, she really pretty. I think I want to kiss her. So it worked out. She wanted to kiss me too, so it was great. Yeah.
Cool. Good.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, you know how we love a sweet love story, romantic story. And what a great start to this will be posting after Valentine's Day, but it's still a sweet little story. So we were really interested in hearing more and having a conversation about sex. We talk about sex quite a bit along with relationships and hearing a little bit more about your thoughts and maybe even giving for listeners who don't know who you are or haven't followed you, and hopefully this is a plug for them to follow you now. Some background about what, you call yourself a fat activist and those pieces of what really is your passion and what you've been doing on social media and in your work. And then we can go into that talking more about fatness, fat phobia, and sex.
Sure. So I started on the internet 10 years ago, which is insane. I turned 30 last year, which isn't old, but I feel like if you didn't have at least MySpace, like you're not really sure what the internet is. I'm turning into one of those old ladies. So I started my account on Instagram initially as like actually an eating disorder recovery account. So during as a teen and an early adult, I suffered pretty bad from a restrictive eating disorder, and I was really frustrated at the like once I got into recovery, I was really frustrated at the easy like access for like pro eating disorder content online, and how also there wasn't really a lot of diverse stories being told of people in different body sizes. It was a very like stereotypical idea of who suffered from an eating disorder. So I did that, and then over the last 10 years, it kind of fell into the body positivity world, and then like the fat world of activism, and kind of like fat phobia and dealing with all of that kind of peer support aspect. And now, because I'm studying to be a counselor, and I also do one-on-one client sessions with peer support for people with body image issues, or who exist in fat bodies, and my work kind of led me here, I think, because like all of my identities kind of intersected, but also I've kind of just always been someone who's very like politically and social justice orientated, and the intersections of like my eating disorder suffering and my mental health stuff, and then also having that experience in a fat body was something that at the time on the internet wasn't really talked about.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the roots of where I came from.
I'm curious what came up for you in making that jump from focusing on eating disorders to being a fat activist? And I know for some of our listeners, like even hearing that language may feel new for them. So welcome everyone to that language. But yeah, I'd like to hear, I guess, a little bit more about I don't know if it's like the values maybe that underpin the work you do, but what comes up for you? And I'm imagining with some of the clients you work with, they're still struggling with eating disorder type mentality and ideas.
Yeah, so I think I think the majority of the world, or at least the Western world, like I've never really come across someone who hasn't had a period of some type of diet culture influence, be that around, body shape or body want or insecurity or food issues or issues with, exercise or what I call movement, because I feel like exercise is a pretty harsh term.
Yes, I say movement all the time. We say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Movement.
um, so yeah, like I have never really met someone that has not experienced that. And I think talking about my eating disorder was really important. But as my recovery got stronger, and as something, because I'm someone who kind of believes that I'm like always in recovery from my eating disorder rather than I'm like recovered, just because in times of high stress or my nervous system has certain tendencies and like, at least cravings to deal with, emotional regulation in that way. And it's something that like kind of is always there for me. But as my recovery got stronger, I think moving away from just talking about eating disorder content was important for me because it wasn't my full story anymore. But for me, and for most people with eating disorders, you can't separate like that mental illness and your identity, because for a lot of sufferers, and it's getting better, but especially like 10, 20 plus years ago, the DSM was like very, it's one of the only categories of mental illness, if we're going to call it that, that is like based on also like your BMI, which is really weird to me
Yeah.
because like nobody would go to the doctor and be like, I have depression. And they're like, you don't meet the weight criteria, like maybe come back. Like,
Yeah.
but they do that for a lot of eating disorder sufferers. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, especially like from a medical industry, like doctors specifically, who still have that mentality that as long as your weight is, in a healthy BMI, which is bullshit anyway, but as long as that exists, then you don't have a problem, or you're just like on a diet, which you should be because of XYZ. So it came really integral for me to talk about my identity and my body, especially because from like a fat phobia perspective, fatness is like one of those identities that people think is like self-chosen.
Mm.
And this isn't everyone, and I would never want to compare to other groups who are marginalized, but like, for example, if someone had an obvious physical disability, most people are like, okay, like you were born with that or something happened to you. And while people are still dicks about that too, like there's some empathy there for people being like, you haven't chosen this situation. But with the fat phobia you receive in a fat body, people are like, well, if it's that bad, just lose weight. um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that like kind of personification and also like put blame on the person for not having accessibility because of their size, because our world is fucked up. It's probably one of those identities that I personally feel one of the most misunderstood, especially because you've got the diet culture industry pumping out like billions and billions of dollars to convince everyone, regardless of if they're fat or not, that we should be smaller. So yeah, it just became, sorry, that was a really long-winded answer, but it really became important for me to talk about those two intersections together. And it's like any other identity, you know, like not being able to talk about my queerness or not being able to talk about my experience with mental health. Like fatness affects the way I am perceived and the way I experience the world. So why wouldn't I talk about that?
Yeah. I appreciate, I mean, be as long-winded as you like. This is golden
Yay.
information for people to hear. And as you're saying, this fat phobia, I mean, it comes from everywhere, but the medical community especially. And I know we've talked about the harm done in the medical community to lots of groups of people, but I think it's just so important to have people like yourself who are giving different information and a different way of being healthy that isn't this toxic model that has harmed so many.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like, you know, that's something that, especially as a counselor and someone who's like very person centered in their approach to a lot of things, whether that be social justice or my counseling work or whatever, you know, the medical model isn't based off that. And Australia is improving. And in Australia, we definitely have more accessibility when it comes to financial healthcare, which I'm so freaking grateful for, you know, compared to the US or other places. But it still is a continual advocacy issue and also just like really exhausting for people. And it also actually does physical harm. Like I was at the gynecologist last week and this is a new gynecologist and she still offered me like weight loss drugs, which is basically like legal speed, which I was like, yeah, no, thanks. But also like, but also, you know, that's still someone who does this as a job, who advocates for myself. And I was exhausted at the end of that day. I was just like, I can't do this again. And for a lot of fat people or a lot of people who are discriminated against in that way, it means they don't go back to the doctor. It means they ignore pain. It means they ignore symptoms. And then one day they might get really sick with something because they either feel like they won't be believed or there's a lot of fear and a lot of like trauma around medical people. And that's when, you know, people can die. Like that's the actual reality of it when we want to talk about it. And that's not even getting into the conversation around weight loss surgeries or weight loss interventions that doctors push, which, you know, for people who choose that, I would never ever judge them because we don't know what it's like to be in their bodies and body autonomy is their choice. But I think the promotion of it and also like the actual health benefits and like the fucked up nature of that. Can I swear in this podcast?
Totally.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
The fucked up nature of that in the medical industry and like the profiteering of that is, in my opinion, super dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen NIDA come out in the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but, you know, promoting and also the American Pediatric Society promoting weight loss surgery for like children.
Yes.
And and regardless of how much you know about weight loss surgery, like it fundamentally changes the way your body absorbs nutrition. And when you put it as simple as a sentence as that, it's a pretty big choice to make. And, you know, for anyone listening who is in a fat body or, you know, has considered weight loss surgery or is going down that road, like, please, like, make your decisions and use your body autonomy. Like, you know, for some people, the risk of that versus accessibility in spaces is important. And that is important to say because there's people who are in larger bodies than me who experience even more discrimination. And for them, that might be a choice that feels really good because they're able to relieve themselves of some of those marginalization issues and oppression. But this mentality that like, oh, if you're fat, like, let's just put you in weight loss surgery, you're a great candidate for that, I think is problematic and super fucked up.
Yeah, and it communicates this idea of, oh, let's fix that, you know?
Yeah,
and
like, that's such a, like, biomedical model, right? Like, every illness is a pathologizing that and just, like, trying to find fixes is, like, what medicine should be about. And my opinion is, like, regardless of your health status, whether you're thin, whether you're not, whether you're able-bodied, whether you're not, you know, people deserve accessibility and accommodations and basic human respect. And health is, at least in the country I live, like something that should be like a fundamental right to access.
Totally.
That's where the piece around when we're talking about sex and our own personal sexuality and our own how people show up in the world as a sexual being and that intersection of how people are treated who are in bigger bodies, who are fat, how that changes the interactions, how there's often, I mean, you'll see in social media how certain body types are like not sexual or I don't know if that's a word, desexualized, but like the idea we are so bombarded with images that sex is one way or sex, the way that a person who is having sex looks a certain way. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about, or if you have your own comments, whether it's research or people you've talked to, or if you want to talk about your own experience, how all of these things we're talking about then influence how a person can show up as a sexual being and in a relationship sexually.
Sure. I always love to talk from my own lived experience because, like, fatness is so diverse, and like
Mhm.
fatness includes other intersections. There's fat people of color, there's fat disabled people, there's fat, people that just have intersections that I don't exist in. So I can't really speak to everybody's experience of fatness. I like to say I'm not the patron saint of fat people. Because when you're like, you have one intersection that other people don't have in the room, and they're like, you, and you're like, bruh, like I'm not the representative, like sent from fat camp, like,
Yeah.
um, so like fatness for me and sex is super complicated. The way I've like to frame it lately is, often in queer spaces we talk about like when you finally come out, and especially for like millennials and up, I feel like we typically, not always, but come out a little later in life or figure out things a little later in life. I'm so glad that Gen Z has more media and representation to figure that out now. That's really exciting. But you have this like second queer adolescence, right? Like you have this second time of being a teenager and a young person and kind of figuring yourself out, whether that's because you held back or you didn't have access or you lived in like a really remote town and there was no other gay people. Like,
Mhm.
that is a common thing. And I think fatness is kind of the same. As a teenager, I was in a lot smaller body than I am now, but I was larger than my peers. And um I often felt like that's a perfect word, like desexualized, like kind of this person who what felt like a sexual being and like, obviously was interested in that because my identity falls in that spectrum, but couldn't really express that, didn't really feel desirable, didn't really feel worthy of other people's love, and kind of just switched off to that part of myself. And then as I've gotten older and I've embraced my identity more, or also like as I've gotten older and like gone on like dating apps or like done the young adult thing of that, or just been on the internet as a fat human, there's this whole other side of fat identity that's super fetishized, specifically by
Yeah.
cis men.
Yes.
That also grosses me the fuck out because like it's really weird to me that fatness is a fetish, but like thinness isn't considered a fetish, even though there's some people who will only ever date thin people. It's
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
what? I think also having like fetishes around body stuff is like really weird, like just a whole other conversation. But fatness in general, I feel like, yeah, like I was either getting these messages that I'm gross and disgusting and nobody would ever want me, or someone only wanting me because of this one part of my identity that felt
Mm.
really fetishized and gross. So I was either not sexual or true sexual, but it wasn't ever really my own claiming of it. It was other people's
Mhm.
like opinions of me. And as a young woman, that's a really scary place to be when you're trying to figure out sex and sexuality. For me, in my early 20s and teens, I didn't even really think I was queer because I was like, "Oh, yeah, I love girls. Everybody thinks they're hot." Like, that's just fact.
I'm
And
still trying to get over the fact that that's not fact.
yeah, I still sometimes am like, everybody's a little bit queer, but then that gets into a weird territory.
I will
Um,
name I problematically still am working on that. It's not problematic that I'm working on it. It's problematic that I
yeah.
go there immediately.
Yeah, same. I'm like, okay. But I was mainly dating cis men. And because I had all of these insecurities, and I also had this like real ingrained thing that my sexuality isn't mine to claim,
Yeah.
it was not my fault and definitely is, a result of cis men and patriarchy. But I often allowed myself to be in situations or allowed treatment of myself without boundaries that now as a 30-year-old would never put up with, because that identity and that experience in the world growing up and as a young woman, like I didn't have any agency over what that meant.
Yeah.
And it's really complicated for a lot of fat people and myself, I think, to experience that. Like I remember I read an article recently and I can't remember where the research was from, but I think it was from like college students in America. And they said they surveyed all these students on campus and they were like, for cis men, like what's your biggest fear on a date? Like when you go on a date with a woman, if they were straight, and they were like, oh, that she'll turn out to be fat. And for cis women, it was like that they'll murder me.
Oh my
Like there was
God.
like,
Oh my gosh.
That
and
paints a
I'm like,
picture.
and I'm like, how? Obviously, like, it's a very inclusive study, but
Yeah.
particularly in, straight cis identity, that's such a fucking crazy thing. But I immediately was like, well, yeah, like, what's the first thing you do when you go on a like online date? You text all your friends his information.
Here's where I'm
you
going.
text,
I'm going to text you in 20 minutes. If not, call someone. Come
yeah,
get.
because that's the reality of the world we live in. But for men, their biggest fear is that a girl would turn up fat. And like, that's such indicative of A, patriarchal systems, but also B, what fat women and fat people are up against in dating and relationships. And also just that, fatness in general is something that, like you said, is desexualized, is like, not preferred. I always find it really funny to like, for this from a cis male perspective or just like a male identifying person perspective, is that like, there's so many like 90s, 2000s sitcoms with like fat husbands and like really hot wives, like
Oh,
really
yes.
young hot wives. And it's like, oh, cool. They are still allowed to be a sexual person because male trumps fatness. But for femme people or people who are, gender diverse, fatness seems to be your first indicator. And for me as a person, talking about gender, that's been one of my biggest struggles because I have always felt like a woman. I am a cis woman and that is my identity. And I've always been super femme, but I never felt womanly enough because I'm tall and I'm broad and I'm fat. And like, if I was like a queer butch woman, like I would fucking rock that, but it's not who I am. And it doesn't necessarily look like what, this girly, petite, waif-like manic pixie dream girl shit that we were sold, For me, I think in the last 10 years, probably more impactful on my relationship with sex is my relationship with fatness and gender versus like the actual mechanics of sex or dating. Cause like fat people can have sex. Like
What? I didn't know that.
Keely and I have said this just about queer sex, right? Like if there's a will, there is a way. We'll make it happen.
oh my God. Literally it's so funny. Like one of our, like a friend of a friend recently, my girlfriend, she's like 32 and she was like, she's very straight. And she was like, how do like queer people, like how do girls have sex? And she was like, well, people still out here thinking we just like hold hands and like, whatever, which is really cool. But yeah, I just think it's so funny that sometimes people are like, oh my God, you're fat and you have sex. Like that really blows people's mind sometimes. But yeah, I think it's just representation too, fatness. I grew up in the years of like Biggest Loser being on TV and
Oh my gosh. Yes, I remember that. I was obsessed with that show. Ugh.
yeah, I think everyone I know was, right? Like millennials who were like, this is the best thing ever. And, in hindsight, it's just like super problematic. But like, I was watching that at like 9 maybe. And, there's a lot of things that can go into like eating disorder diagnosis or, susceptibility or risk. But I do think that early programming of those types of things and media definitely still had an impact. I think either way, I was kind of destined to, because I have so many risk factors with ED stuff, like I was destined to have an eating disorder. But, there was a lot in mainstream culture that really helped kind of accelerate that for me, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes yes, there were so many things. And oh gosh, when you say Biggest Loser, and I think about just the mentality. I mean, it's February right now. So January is all of those goals that we have and all of that pushing of weight loss. And something that, so I'm not a medical doctor, duh, but I feel like I always have to disclaim that before I say something about bodies. Something I remember that made a lot of sense to me that I heard, because when we're talking about, so we're talking about fatness, and then we're also talking about body size, and then this idea of how like eating disorders and then also restricted eating. And so something that really struck me, and I'm like, we need to talk about this way more, but I don't have the medical things to back it up, is when when people are having restricted eating, and when there's a threshold of, I think, percentage of body fats that really influences our desire to have sex. And so I think that's something that isn't talked about, whatever body size is, when we're talking about restricted eating, all of these things come up and we don't talk about enough. It's like, are you eating? Like,
Right.
you're coming to
Those
counseling.
basic needs.
Yeah, like, you're coming to counseling and you're saying you're not really interested in sex, or you wanting to be more interested in sex because your partner is wanting it, or there's all these reasons why people come to it. And we're not saying, hey, are you eating enough? Are you getting enough nutrients? Are you restricted eating? What is your relationship to your body, and how are you taking care of your body?
And I think it's one of those things that with fatness, like so many things, whether it's pain, whether it's nutrition, whether it's movement, whether it's anything, anytime there's a problem, we've been told since we were little, like, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Like, it's your fault, lose weight is the answer. So when that becomes the schema and the messaging, your internal, especially for someone like me who had an eating disorder, like my internal body cues, like I'm still trying to get them back. Like I'm still 10 years down the road in recovery being like, oh, unless I'm at a 10 of hunger or a 10 of thirsty or a 10 of tired, I don't know. And like part of that is also like my trauma history and, a whole bunch of other shit that makes me. But I think it's common for fat people. I think fat people have consistently denied accessibility, denied comfort, denied pleasure in whatever aspect you want to define pleasure. And that includes food, like we've deprived ourselves. And when deprivation is your set point, when deprivation feels normal, when deprivation feels like what you have to do to be a quote unquote good person, because there's this whole other conversation around morality that I think is interesting. Like, as we move away from religion as a society, our like praising into wellness and diet culture as like absolution for being a good person, it's really fucking interesting to me and super ableist. But yeah, like I think for me, like that has always been a really interesting question. And it's kind of one of those things that when you get to this intersection of this, and then you're someone who also has mental illness or has neurodivergence or has any type of other marginalization or just is a human with, complexity. It's what came first, like the chicken or the egg, right? But with fat bodies, it's always, well, yeah, if you lost weight, like everything would be better. And it's
Yeah.
just not fucking true.
No, it's not true, but you're right, that is the message. It's like, "Oh, all you have to do is lose weight. All you have to do is be in this certain number, whether it's a size or this certain number of pounds." And I think that is the messaging that I wanna make really clear, and I'm trying to think of how to say it concisely. Maybe it'll just have to be a quote outside of this, but the idea that a person's size and a person's body doesn't determine how much pleasure they're able to receive or that they're able to experience. And we connect that and we say, oh, people of a certain size live life better, or they get to have better sex. And we're talking about sex. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is the body image. This is the body size that gets to have pleasurable sex. And then everyone else
Yeah.
doesn't get to, and that's just not true. And I think that's part of the
Yeah.
intersection of the activism is like, and you see this online with when you're following the right people.
Yeah.
Meet really fucking rad people of all sizes, different abilities, different looking bodies that are out there saying loud, I'm having sex and this is how I'm having sex.
Yeah. And I think that like contribution of other, things like, white supremacy and capitalism and, all of this stuff that says like there's a certain human who deserves things. There's a certain human who has earned things. There's a certain human who is a good person innately. And they deserve this over other people. And, that conversation, affects all of us, but particularly fatness, because, yeah, like there's a really great book. I can't remember what it's called. I'll have to message you guys later via email. It's either called Fat Black History or something like that, but I'll look it up for you guys. And it's like directly the link specifically between like fatness and racism and how they intersect so clearly, especially because, for people of color or just, different groups of people that are from different places or, different racial backgrounds have different type bodies or different heights or different sizes. And that also goes with fatness and kind of the radicalization of fatness in terms of also how that intersects with like racism and white supremacy is a really interesting thing that obviously I don't have experience in and can't really touch on, but it's something that I'm like trying to educate around myself more because that makes sense, right? Like racism in every country I think is a major issue, but specifically I know for in Australia is a huge thing. And that's like such an intersection that especially I feel like in mainstream body positivity conversation is kind of lacking. Like every cool social justice movement, it's like pretty much founded by like Black people and people of color. And, that is the same for body positivity and by activism, like women of color specifically have been like leading this charge from like the 60s. And it's really important to acknowledge that, I think, because having an intersection of fatness and racism, I can't imagine what that experience might be like. Whereas like, in my identity, I still am a white person. So there's a level of privilege that I receive in my body automatically.
Thanks for touching on that because that is so important.
Hey, it's Cardinal, your behind the scenes buddy. Fearing the Black Body. That's a book by Sabrina Strings. That's the one Dani was talking about. An instant classic, expertly researched and written. Highly recommend. You know what else I recommend? Sharing your queer joy with the world. It's me. I'm the world. I want to hear your queer joy. Leave us a voice message at 503-660-0994. It doesn't have to be joy. It could be a question or an update or grief or anything, really. Remain anonymous or include your name. It's up to you. All right, back to the show.
I'm looking at time and thinking about shifting to queer joy, but I do want to take a moment. I guess I try to wrap things up and there isn't like this list that we can give listeners to be like now so that you can have more, be more in your body or more kind to yourself. This is how you do it. But I wonder if there's a last couple things that you would just want to point out from your experience. What is the shift or what's those first steps for someone listening who's saying, like, I don't like my body or, all this negative self-talk. I can prove in my past that no one likes bigger bodies or no one likes a fat body because I haven't dated very many people or it's been really hard for me to date or I'm not looked at as a sexual being. What do you recommend or how do you help someone move forward from that position?
I think like not that you have to do this to be in a relationship. I hate that quote where people are like, you have to love yourself before you love anyone else. Cause like there's times you hate yourself and people still love you. Like
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
not a requirement for people to love you. But I do think in terms of fatness specifically, like, there is a lot of self-healing that goes into that because you have experienced a lot of trauma and usually oppression in your body. And to unpack that requires some self-reflection, requires some like self-compassion that a relationship can help with, but is not going to heal what you think it's going to heal. And so I would start there, like start with your own self-compassion, start with your own like sexual experience with yourself. Like, I'm the biggest advocate of being like, sex with yourself or sex or erotic pleasure or pleasure or exploring that is so exciting and wonderful. And like, you don't need a partner or partners to do that. And maybe that's the part that you start with, as a fat person. Maybe that's the path that you walk is that you start your erotic and pleasure relationship with yourself and kind of figure out what that is first. And also probably just connect with other fat people or other providers that start following some fat rad people on Instagram. Like even just exposure and marinating in other people's joy. Like you guys talk about queer joy. We talk a lot about fat joy in the fat community. And yeah, just start following some rad people who are fat. Like, like get your brain associating fatness with a different schema. And they're probably like two really easy places to start because it doesn't include anyone else.
Yeah, that the biggest message of following people, and also it's shifting that narrative that I think it's still very ingrained in our society that fat equals bad or fat is not good. And even I was just watching, oh God, okay. I guess it's just admission day. Like the Love is Blind. I don't know if anyone watched the
Oh my God.
I will admit to also having watched all of Love
Yeah.
is Blind.
It's one of my guiltiest pleasures. Like I'm like, reality TV and me were made for each other. Yes, please.
talking about the new episodes, so if you haven't seen it, they now have the new release of all the things, and they're still talking about the comment about what she eats or her being perceived as fat or her being fat or whatever. And the whole piece of it is I'm sitting there listening and watching and being like, why is this even a thing? Because we still consider calling someone fat to be an insult.
Yeah.
And
It's
that is the
funny.
narrative shift.
I think it's funny too because Love and Blind is like, as we all know, super straight, at least in its like formatting. We don't know about the contestants' like personal identity. But
Yeah.
like, if there was a fat guy on it, they would be fine. It's only about femme people or women. Like, because, men are independent, autonomous beings, regardless of their weight. Women are like, what they look like. And I think it's interesting that you said that, and also just like interesting to explore that as a concept because, fatness in general is something that affects every part of your life, like not just sex and relationships. We have such a human need to have connection, and that might look like a lot of different things for different people. And fatness can sometimes be a barrier or a perceived barrier in that really has fucking very little to do with connection. But it's seen like this really extreme barrier to that. And I always forget because, like, I live in a very fat accepting world. I do this as my job. All of my friends do this. I'm, studying to be a therapist. Like, I live in a different world than I think mainstream people. But, I think about this conceptually as like, even if there's listeners listening to this episode who don't identify in a fat body or wouldn't use that word to describe themselves or are in a smaller body, like, fat phobia exists to oppress all of us. Like, like thin people are on diets too. Thin people are scared of getting fat. Thin people are complying to behaviors and dangerous ideals to prevent fatness because it's this big scary thing that's going to get you. So, like, fat phobia, like dismantling fat phobia doesn't just make it easier for fat people. The same as dismantling ableism doesn't just make it easier for, people who are in able-bodied bodies. Like, it affects everyone. And I wish that people in smaller bodies sometimes understood that more, is that like this isn't just about fat accessibility, and fat accessibility also plays into accessibility for more people in general, like so it's important to kind of be fat accepting and aligned in that way for everybody because also what is fat? Like, we could get into that question.
We have this word, and like I think about children on the playground, or I think when I was a kid, and like people would go around using that as an insult and be like, "You're fat, you're fat." But the thing in the back of the mind is like, "Oh, if I'm fat, whatever fat means, I'm not lovable. No one's gonna like me. No one's gonna want to date me. No one's gonna want to have sex with me." Those are all those like basic dismantling that even if logically we can sit here as adults and be like, well, yeah, that's true. People will love me in spite of my size. But at the end of the day, we have that programmed in us from such a young age. And so much. This is a topic that we could go on and on about. I appreciate all of this discussion. And I know Melissa shaking her head saying, yes, she does.
Yes, no, I really do. And especially, I think your last point, like any of these structures that are toxic, they harm everybody, And so I appreciate you naming that. And I hope that gives some encouragement's not the right word. I hope it lights a fire under some asses to hear that,
Yeah.
you know, truly, because we're all part of changing this issue.
Yeah, so true.
And you know what? The best way to protest is have sex. Go have sex.
Yeah.
And this ties in. I don't want to forget that we talked a lot about, we had an episode a couple weeks back that talked about working with different things with your body. And I do want to like really emphasize, and we'll try and have some links, have Cardinal put in some links of like, there are resources and like, yeah, there are real things that depending on what your body size is, your height, your shape, there's these pieces that, learning about what positions or using different things, using different props, using different things to make sex more pleasurable. Cool. Like, let's talk about that because that's when we embrace all bodies, however they come, then we can talk about the ways that how do we make with our partners have those situations work to have more pleasure.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool because especially for think sex is, which I'm sure we could all talk about that for 500 years, but like what sex looks like I rarely had like queer sex representation correctly. I definitely didn't have straight sex representation correctly. And then you talk about like the people that I did see in sex, whether that be like, you know, exposure to porn or, you know, these places where young people often foray into sexual spaces. Fatness didn't exist at all. So I was like, if fat people would just not have sex, spoiler, we do.
Well, on that note, and pleasure and sex and queerness, it's time for queer joy and sharing in our queer joy for the week. Who would like to go first? I have to think about mine. I know I have queer joy, but I have to think about mine for a minute.
Do you have a queer joy, Dani? Do you want a minute?
Yeah, I want a minute because I wanted to sound like really like, you know, great.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure.
Oh my gosh. I
Like you're
guess I'm
debating
up
if you
first.
should say something.
What?
Are you debating like which one to say? Because which one do you want?
Yeah,
Out?
I am, but I think I'm going to go with one. This always happens. I'm going with one I didn't expect to go to, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That just means I have unexpected joy, and that's like wonderful sometimes. I think I named this in a recent recording, and I will likely maybe talk about this a little bit more at some point when we do updates, but I have been doing a shit ton of grieving. It's been really sad. And I laugh because I'm like, we grieve on the weekends and then I put it together and I show up and I do my job. But one of the pieces of joy, I guess, that I want to share is I had a really positive metamor like integration experience. And, you know, I intentionally try to be sort of vague about partners for their own privacy. And, you know, I'm out on this podcast as poly and queer, and my partners are and metamors are not all out as various things. So that's why I'm trying to be vague. But I had a really positive metamor connection, and it was in the context of me grieving. And I had a name beforehand, like, I don't want to kill the mood, number one. Number two, if I become nonverbal, it is not because I am uncomfortable with the poly dynamic or with my metamor who I'm trying to get to know. And I wanted to make sure that wasn't like interpreted incorrectly. So there was a lot of discussion beforehand just about like my condition and the state I was in. And I was so grateful that it just was, everyone was really chill about it. And I was checked in with, and my metamor was checked in with, my partner was checked in. Like everyone just did a really good job, honestly, of being very ethical. And you know, I had some, I don't know if I'll share all of it, Keely, you know more, but I had some embarrassing moments. Maybe I'll share that another day. I can't do that today. I had an embarrassing moment like in front of my metamor to the point where now I'm really grateful for it because I'm like, well, fuck, I can't do anything worse than that. Like that's it's as bad as it gets. I'm sure I could. I can really embarrass myself when I want to. So anyway, yeah, the queer joy is that I just felt really supported. And in some ways, I might have been glad that I was grieving because it seemed to be more of the focus. And we all just seemed to get comfortable with the poly dynamics, which could have been the main focus and created a lot of anxiety for the whole system. So I actually think it worked really well that it was just about rallying.
Yeah. Yay. That's lovely.
It was kind of a long-winded queer joy, but yeah, again, the context of it felt
That's
important.
cool. You get to be long-winded sometimes. I listened back to episodes and I was like, wow, that queer joy is like 5 minutes. So
Yeah. I'm just trying to give you both a chance to think.
well, I leave my children out of the episode sometimes, or but I will say, like, my joy of the week, honestly, my queer joy of the week is getting to take my child who just turned 15, get to
Wow.
take her to get her driver's permit, and we got to have a drive and just have a lovely day driving to Hood River, which is this like little town with this little DMV on the water in like a marina, a DMV in the marina. The Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know what they call it in Australia, but it's where you can get your driver in the States, you can get your driver's permit at 15, or at least in Oregon. I don't know about other states. In Oregon, you can get your driver's permit at 15. And so she was taking it and it was just really sweet. And it's just that's it. It was just a sweet moment, and there's something really beautiful, and I love birthdays, and we get to talk. We went and had breakfast beforehand and talking about she's very into astrology, and she was just talking about what it means to be an Aquarius and
Oh my God. Air
Oh,
sign for life. Yeah.
and, like, when I talk about my kids, it's always queer, at least my older one, because, like, all of her friends are super queer and non-binary, trans in the theater program.
I
So
love when you talk about those theater kids.
Oh my
They're
God. They're my people. Yes, please.
Uh,
well, Dani, what is your queer joy?
Sure. So, just quickly, I'm so sorry that you're grieving right now. That's such a hard place to be. I have it's funny bit of grief in the last week too. Actually, we our 13-year-old doggy got put down a couple of weeks ago. And it was my girlfriend's dog, and like when she moved in, yeah, it's just really hard adjustment for her and us as a family to like lose a pet. So a little bit of grieving for me too. Also, it made me think of my the like when I got my driver's permit. So in Australia, from 16 to 17, you have to log 100 hours with a supervised driver and then like submit a logbook and then go for your test. And I got it at 16. And I remember driving home and then I put my brother in the car, who at the time was like 12, maybe 12, 13. And I was like to my mom, we were like, oh, we're going to go get, Nick was like, I really want to go get ice cream with my younger brother. And my mom was like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. And I was like, well, I'll take him. And she's like, I remember just standing on the driveway watching them pull out like my two kids in the car, like, oh no. So, oh my God, brave that she's driving. That's really cool. So, fellow air sign, I'm a Libra, vibe with the
Oh,
astrology
yeah.
content. Anyway, my queer joy for this week, I think, is probably just like this is being my partner's first Valentine's Day. It's my first Valentine's Day with a girlfriend, so that's exciting.
Yeah.
But also yesterday I did a whole bunch of Valentine's Day prepping for my girlfriend and also for my queer platonic partner. And we also even made a little Valentine's pack for our next door neighbor because she's single and, wouldn't be celebrating Valentine's Day with anyone. And I really love that queer, especially queer joy, but also queer love comes in so many shapes and forms. That does include sex sometimes and sometimes doesn't. And yeah, I'm living my best queer family life. Like everyone refers to our relationship as a throuple, even though that's not really true, but kind of.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm just really happy on Valentine's Day to be surrounded by people that, are queer and cool and all in love with each other in special and unique ways.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's the best.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So much love. Well, Dani, as we wrap up, before we go, can you let folks know how to reach you, how to follow you? Anything
Sure.
up?
So I am contactable or followable on any social media. My handle is I am Dani with one N Adriana. That's my first and second name. At the moment, a lot of the things I'm focusing on is kind of transitioning to more counseling information, counseling resources, kind of integrating myself as a student and like little baby clinician eventually. And also doing a lot of one-on-one like fat peer support sessions. So if anyone listening is interested, I run fat peer support sessions via Zoom from anywhere in the world. And we can talk about so many cool stuff around body and fatness and dating and basically everything we talked about on this podcast today and more. So yeah, I also have that service available if anyone is interested.
Yay. Well, thank you for joining us today. And I hope you all have a queer and joyful week.
Thanks for listening to Queer Relationships, Queer Joy, a podcast by the Connective Therapy Collective. Hosted by Keely C. Helmick and Melissa DeSeguron, with audio edited by Leigh Supapo Bernito and co-edited by me. I'm your producer, Cardinal Marking. Intro music is by Bad Snacks. This week's guest was Dani Adriana. Find Dani on any social media at iamdaniadriana. If this episode made you smile or think, tell us about it. If you hated it, tell us about that. Review us on iTunes or Spotify, or send us an email at media@connectivetherapycollective.com. For more queer joy, visit our Instagram at Queer Relationships Queer Joy. Love ya. Bye.